Hey everyone, it's Rory's Reviews, and today I am starting my first cycle of Symphony reviews, or my first Symphony cycle reviews, however you'd like to say that. Put those words in whatever order you would like. Anyway, for my first Symphony cycle review, I have decided to review the Symphony cycle of British composer Edmund Rubbra. Rubbra, like I said, is a British composer, the early 20th century. He wrote 11 symphonies, so we're going to be covering all 11, starting with the first one today, right now. But first, let me give you a little bit of background on where Edmund Rubbra is coming from as a symphonist. So, Edmund Rubbra could be considered part of a group of British composers who were involved in what's commonly called the 20th century English Renaissance. Now, what does that mean? Well, at the beginning of the 20th century, British people started to realize that they've kind of been out of the music loop for a long while. The last major British composer at this time period had been Henry Purcell, who was all the way back in like the 17th century, and now it's the 20th century, and British composers are starting to say, or British people rather are starting to say, where are all the British composers? And why aren't they getting out there on the music scene? So, what happened was, Britain finally got a composer. They got two composers who became very famous and very well known in their lifetime and beyond. Those two composers were Edward Elgar and Ralph Vaughan Williams. And these two composers are sort of considered the leaders of this British musical renaissance, because following their lead, tons of other British composers just immediately started coming out of the woodwork, seemingly out of nowhere. It's like this just burst of creativity in the United Kingdom. But the thing is, though, that Edward Elgar and Ralph Vaughan Williams were so popular, and they became so well known that a lot of these other British composers that started coming out as a result of this movement sort of got the shaft in terms of popularity and in terms of people who knew who they were, because pretty much people only know Edward Elgar and Ralph Vaughan Williams. And Benjamin Britten, some people know him too. But a bunch of other composers like William Alwyn, Arnold Bax, Malcolm Arnold, Michael Tippett. So many of these early 20th century British composers are just forgotten by a large majority of the public. And Edmund Rubbra was one of those composers. And to me, he is probably one of my favorite of these little-known British composers. I just think his music and his symphonies are fantastic. And I'm excited to be getting into them. So let's start with Symphony number 1. So usually when a composer writes his or her first of anything, be it a symphony or a string quartet or a piano sonata, the first one is usually not as good as they could have done. And this is understandable. I mean, it's their first try at something, and also usually it's early on in their life, and they haven't really found their voice yet and all this other stuff. composer problems. But this is not the case with Rubra's first symphony. In fact, his first symphony is probably one of the best symphonies in the cycle. And I say that not to make you think that this is the best and it's all downhill from here. I'm just saying, in terms of my personal opinion, this symphony is pretty freaking good. But at the same time, it's a bit atypical for Rubbra, and I'll explain why. First of all, Rubbra is a composer who is not overtly dramatic most of the time. Most of the time his music is dramatic, but not in a hysterical sort of way, or in a way you think, alright, this is awesome! It's more like, it's dramatic, but not that dramatic. It's a little bit reserved. But not so in this symphony. This symphony is quite dramatic, and it's quite intense, and it's quite all those things that people usually love about dramatic and intense and crazy composers. And when I say this symphony is intense, I mean it. Like, man, I've listened through this symphony like a bunch of times, and I can barely find a moment where he just kind of calms down. Every single moment of the symphony is filled with tension, and that's really hard to do. It's really hard to do and make it effective because you need tension and you need release. That's what music is made up of. It's tension and release. But this symphony, with this one, it's more like tension, more tension, a little bit less tension, but it's always sort of like there in the background. And it works. It works really good. It's really effective because it just builds and builds. And when the final note of the symphony comes, you can finally take that breath of fresh air that you've been waiting to get off your chest because this whole experience has been so intense. Yeah, it's kind of like that. So anyway, let me get into the musical specifics because I've been rambling about what the mood of the symphony is like for a while. So this symphony is in 3 movements. There's a fast first movement and another fast second movement, less fast than the first movement, but still moderately fast. And then the last movement is a slow movement, because if you had 3 fast movements, that's not good. That's not good contrast. So immediately when you listen to the first moments of the symphony, you can feel the tension I was talking about. It's like you've just been thrown right into the middle of some kind of war or something going on. The strings are pulsating in this with this crazy rhythmic drive, and the brass has this really driving chorale type thing going on, and the woodwinds have this fast version of that chorale, and it's just flying over everything else. It's quite an experience listening to the first moments of the symphony, I have to say. So in this first movement, right away, Rubbra shows 2 of his main talents that makes me like this composer so much. And first is his ability, his ear for counterpoint. Rubbra is very, very good at counterpoint, and in my opinion. And in this movement, there's always more than one thing going on, pretty much at all times. I think I've checked, and there's pretty much not a moment of this movement that's not polyphonic in some way. And another skill that Rubbra is really good at that makes me like him so much is developing motifs. He's very, very good at this. He's very good at taking motifs or themes or whatever you want to call them and just morphing them and transforming them and stretching that transformation out over such a long period of time and never losing interest. And he does that in this movement. Pretty much all the themes that you are going to hear in this movement you hear in the first like 5 seconds, and he just keeps changing it and changing it. The rhythmic groove in the strings like changes its pulse and changes its direction, and the melody in the brass and in the woodwinds morph over time. And it's very similar to how Sibelius eventually ended up doing his little thematic transformation thing. And I think Rubbra was very influenced by Sibelius. His music has a lot of similarities with Sibelius. So if you like Sibelius, you will probably like Rubbra. So he shows off these two scales very well in this movement. It keeps you on the edge of your seat. It's very energetic throughout the whole thing. Even when it's quiet, there's always these little like intense rumblings in the lower strings. And so then the second movement is like a march, sort of. No, not sort of. It is a march. It is. And in this movement, Rubbra does something that he'll be very fond of doing throughout his career, and that's taking innocent dance themes and turning them into like crazy, off the wall dance themes. And this is probably his most exuberant example of that. When this movement starts, you hear like this march theme, and it sounds pretty innocent, but at the same time, the bass part or the lower strings or something lower than the melody has this like really menacing tone to it right off the bat. So you've got this juxtaposition between this playful melody and this weird like menacing, grumbly bass thing. And so right away, you know you're not quite in for this cute little march. And that's very true. This march turns into this very banal and grotesque, like, it's so cool. By the end of it, it's just like this little innocent march tune just gets turned into this big banal hurrah. I don't even know how to explain it. You gotta listen to it. It's just one of those things you gotta listen to. And once again, Rubbra shows off his love of counterpoint, which he does very well in this movement as well. And his love of transforming themes, because you can't transform an innocent march theme into a grotesque, banal, blast your face thing without changing a few things. So then comes a third movement, and the third movement probably takes up like half the symphony. It's about 17 minutes, I think, 17 or 18 minutes, and it's pretty much sounds like a funeral dirge, I guess. It's it almost sounds like the march. To me, I don't like to I don't like to impress too many images on my audience, but to me, I'm just gonna say it sounds like the march is like some crazy battle, and then the slow movement is like the fallout of that battle, and we're just staring at a bunch of dead soldiers and smoke and stuff. That's what it sounds like to me. You can have your own interpretation of it. You get your own images. Yeah, get your own images. But anyway, it's a very beautiful movement, and it's considered a chaconne. I haven't quite heard that all the way through. I sort of hear how it's a chaconne, but I haven't pieced it all out in my mind yet. But it doesn't matter whether or not it's a chaconne, because no matter if it's a chaconne or whatever it is, it's freaking beautiful. The orchestration is great. There's lots of moments, including the very beginning, where very low instruments are in very high registers, like the string bass, and it's just like freaking beautiful. And there's sounds in there that I haven't heard from any other composers, and the way it builds, it's just awesome. Like themes weave in and out of each other and build off of each other, and eventually it's just like, you're hearing all these new themes pop up, but they're not new themes. They've just been built off of all the things we've already heard, like Rubbra does so well. And man, it builds to these two climaxes, or two main climaxes at least, that are just like earth-shattering. These are just like earth-shattering climaxes. And I mean, if you really like slow, dramatic music, you're gonna love this. And if you like fast, dramatic music, you're gonna like the first two movements. And if you like dramatic music in general, you're gonna like the symphony. That's really all I can say about the symphony, I guess, without going into too much detail, because I don't want to go into like too much detail. Because if I went into too much detail, this would probably be like an hour-long video and no one would watch it, except for like hardcore classical music fans, which are out there, and I'm thankful for you guys. But I'm gonna keep this in like under 20 minutes, I guess. So yeah, just to sum things up, this is a very dramatic movement, or not movement, symphony. It's a very dramatic symphony, lots of intensity, lots of, if you want to call them hysterics, yeah, there's lots of hysterics in this symphony. This is uncommon for Rubbra. You're not gonna get so many hysterics and so many like exuberant gestures in his other symphonies. So if you like that sort of thing, enjoy it while you can, because it's in here and it's not in the other things to this extent, at least. The counterpoint is amazing. The way he just weaves themes out of this common fabric is amazing. The way he transforms themes over time to create something new and always keeping the music interesting is great. This is just a really great symphony, and I can't really think of any major flaws in it. The only thing I can think of is if you just don't like it. Like, it's just not to your taste, and that's cool, bruh. I mean, you're not gonna like everything, so. But in terms of musicality, or in terms of sort of more objective things, I can't think of any real big flaws with this symphony. It's really good. So I recommend the Symphony, and Rubra's Symphony cycle is off to a really bang-up start, if I do say so myself. So, I'll see you in the next video where I review his second symphony. Alright, see ya. Thanks for watching.